This is another edition of Prime Edition, and we are talking about the manifestos that have been put forward by the political parties, especially those four that are running for the presidency. When it's all about sports, you've had everything about agriculture, you've had about the arts, you've had about education, all policies, but where does sport fall in? Well, we've taken a look at the manifestos and two come out clear. One is from the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Coalition Party, and the other is basically by the United Democratic Alliance or the Kenya Kwanza grouping. And they put out what they need to speak about sport. How do we understand it? Where is sport in the country? What is the current legal framework? What needs to be done to ensure that there is a good way of managing sport in the country and moving it from just a social and recreative thing to a full commercial enterprise? Just to put it into context, $500 billion a year. That's what sport generates globally. Can Kenya get a real share of that production pie rather than be a consumer? Well, in studio to speak about that, on my immediate left, I've got Cynthia Mumbo, founder and CEO of Sports Connect Africa. She has played for the national basketball team and is involved with development programs at various levels, not just in Kenya, but across the world. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you.
And I've got a lawyer and sports consultant, Kamuya. And Ngarua, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Ngarua, I'll start with you. And just Kenya has got a sports law that is in place, and from its inception, I mean, when it came into force in 2013 to where we are today, what's the legal background for it, and how does it augur in with development rather than the elite side?
Okay. So prior to 2013, all sporting organizations were registered under the Societies Act, CAP 108. And you see, the biggest problem that we've had in Kenya is that, granted, sports was brought to us by the colonial master, but when they brought it,
we had wrestling.
Yeah, okay, you can say that, but
Ajua.
yeah, Ajua. But what we consider sport nowadays, I mean, football, rugby, basketball, what it is, they were brought to us by the colonial master. And the sporting organizations they formed were for recreation. They were never for pro sports.
Yes.
Problem is, when we took over the management of those sporting organizations, we still continued exactly what the white man was doing. And it took, nearly 50 years post-independence to realize that there was need for a sports act, first to govern sporting organizations. And I mean, prior to 2013, sporting organizations could not even own property because they were societies. So creating that separate legal entity and a framework that governs the sporting side was important. It's a step in the right direction, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. And like we're talking off air, and Cynthia and I were saying, is that what you come to discover in Kenya is that there are so many people thriving in the chaos that is the sporting industry, and any semblance of proper corporate governance or proper structures is fought. So it's a step in the right direction, but still a lot more work needs to go to make it a full commercial enterprise, for lack of a better word.
And for sport to be commercial, it will have that mainly comes at elite level. But from the development side and things, and Cynthia, because you've worked with the NBA and they always say the NBA is basketball, and it's just one of them. What is it that the NBA Africa is doing that can be borrowed and the concept used across all federations?
So first, the NBA is a media company. It's registered as NBA Media LLC.
It's actually an entertainment fund.
Yes.
With football as the activity.
With basketball as the activity.
Sorry, basketball as the activity.
Yes. And every single aspect of the NBA, everyone, the players, every aspect, the pitches, the
courts,
the courts, every single aspect is an asset that is managed professionally. So the floor, the screens you see, the players, the management, the coaches, every aspect is an asset. So the NBA One is a limited liability company. It is not necessarily a federation. So we need to be able to understand that there's a difference between federations and how federations run. And what the NBA is, so FIBA is a federation. And a FIBA has always, for the last, I think, 3-4 years, they've been awarded the best run federation in the world in terms of governance. So we would need to understand what's the difference between a federation and a limited liability company. The NHL is a limited liability company. Liverpool is a limited liability company. The English Premier League is a limited liability company, but then they have
the FA.
The FA,
the FA, yeah.
Yes, the FA, which is a federation. And so federations are mandated to run sports activities, so not just leagues. So whether it's development, whether it's leagues, whether it is in some cases infrastructure development, whether it's capacity and capability, having the right people, so training of trainers, and growing that. But what the West has got right that we are still struggling with is being able to differentiate where the federation lies and the corporate side of the sports and what we call secretariats here, where the corporate side lies. And so I'll go to your question. What does the NBA do with, the NBA Africa? NBA Africa have set up a limited liability company. They are running two separate entities. So they have NBA Africa, and then they have the Basketball Africa League. And so the league is an entity on its own, limited liability entity, and they're
that is the elite end of it.
The elite, and then under NBA where development comes in. So they have junior NBA, and they have training of trainer programs. They have basketball without borders, and all of that runs under the NBA itself. But they're intertwined. So you have the operations team, the sports operations team works on both, on both ends. That you have a sports ops team that is managing the Basketball Africa League, and then you have the overall NBA sports operations team that manages the development aspect of the game.
Well, and I'll go straight to one manifesto, and I'll start with the Azimio la Umoja. And this is what they basically said as their commitment to the sports industry. One of the things they want to do is improve sports management, enhance transparency and accountability, improve coaching standards, and that is Art 2. Now, the other one that they've put out, and let me read it out. Establish a sports business council to develop new business strategy, improve access to finance and skill development, whose membership will be drawn from leading public and private sector organizations working in sport. Now, as Ngarwa, let me come to you. I mean, from those two things, you wouldn't get money if a corporate is not going to touch you with a 10-foot pole. If basically you're forever in courts or at the tribunal or basically throwing mud at each other.
The funny thing is, when you told me about this particular topic, the first thing that was in my mind is the first thing that has come out of Cynthia's mouth today. And is that if people like us were not involved in drafting these manifestos, then I have a lot of questions to ask about what went into it. But anyway, it's interesting. If I'm a corporate organization, it's about attaching myself to a valuable asset. Absolutely. Administrators have a very big problem in Kenya because we don't view, that's all they do, they administer, or whatever you want to call it. It's administrate, sorry, for lack of a better word.
And we still don't do that well.
Exactly, and we still don't do that well. But we don't look at this, federations or sporting organizations as assets. So one, do I want to be attached to an asset that's not valuable? That's a big problem. But even the bigger issue for me is the culture of politics is so entrenched in everything we do in Kenya that the minute money checks in, now politics becomes there.
And I want to come in there because they're talking about enhancing transparency and accountability. The question I want to ask, how much can government do? We've seen with cricket, a normalization committee. We've seen with swimming, the SDT came in, the sports tribunal. Eventually, they are under what is called, another normalization committee for swimming. Football, transition committee, caretaker committee. How much can government do to put this in order?
Frankly speaking, with the people that we have and people behind, they don't look at sports from it's still social and recreational, like we've been saying. So are they going to put in that much effort? I don't think they really care. It's all about this normalization committees. Why do we get to that point? Why do we get to that point? Why are we there? I mean, for football, for example, this is not the first time it's happening. We didn't learn from the last time it happened. Come on, guys. So it's just a big, to me, it has to be something that the delegates, and the delegates in this case are the various clubs, it has to be a choice that they make. Otherwise, we remain in this nonsense.
So, at the end of it all, Cynthia, then let me just come in then. What can government do Because as Azimio are basically saying, they will make sure that standards are set. How do you crack this whip? Already there is a sports act in place that directs how this should be done.
So, one, there needs to be will. I don't think we have the will to genuinely change or improve Kenyan sport. I don't think we have the will. Two, we need to understand that the core of sports are two stakeholders, the athlete and the fan. Period. Everybody else is an enabler. Unfortunately, our system, we literally bow down to administrators. Right? We literally bow down. I know more about the president of the FKF.
Yes.
I know more about president of KBF or volleyball or whatnot than I do know about athletes. Now, anywhere else in the world where sports works, when you switch on the TV, the story is the athlete. The story is what the consumer is doing. So I'm coming back to your question because you're asking what should government do, and I'm going to give an example of what's happening in Nigeria. They have just as an issue as we do, and their sporting space is huge. They export sport just as much as we do. So the NBA has more Nigerians playing than any other African nation. Or, you know, when you go to Europe, you have so many Nigerians playing football and everything. And so there was a question like, why is it that we can do so well out there? So what they are doing now is they're putting in place a sports policy that will move sports from social. I mean, the social aspect is always going to be there, but they're moving sports from social to commercial. In fact, sports, the new policy is suggesting and is pushing for sports to be moved from the Ministry of Sports and Culture to the Ministry of Commerce. And what they're trying to do is what they did, because Nigeria has a very strong, one of the strongest entertainment policies, where, you know, Nollywood is huge and their music has taken over the world. And so they are saying we have the same capacity, the same blueprint. How can we move that and do the same with sports? And they're doing that. I know that I've seen this, the draft sports policy and stuff. There's that coming together. 2 days ago, the private sector came together and said, okay, those of us who are running, you know, sports consultants like us and those who are in business and whatnot, let's start a lobby group, come together as external and see how we can support government to run this. So the Sports Business Council is a good idea if you ask me. It's just a matter of how will that support government to move sports in this nation to that.
And funny thing, just to add on to what she's saying, in terms of Nigeria and how the business community in Nigeria are thinking ahead, she's talked about NBA Africa being actually a limited liability company, and the people who've bought in, I mean, granted President Obama has 5%, but the heavy investors, the guys who've done the heavy lifting, are all Nigerians.
Nigeria.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's going to change. And let's talk about the other one. And this is purely development. And the one thing that has always worked for Kenya for a long time has been the school system. The question is then, how is it supported from the manifestos that we have here? And I'm not focusing mainly on the CBC, but there is an existing structure, the Kenya Secondary School Sports Association, the Kenya Primary School Sports Association. How do they get supported?
So, two things that I think for myself is, number one, we need to make it attractive, and attractive in this sense, from a transition standpoint. It just can't be that once you finish fourth form, then your sport ends there, or there's no career that's coming after that. We have to make it attractive from that sense, so that we have more parents pushing their kids to focus on sport. If we look at every successful sport story in Kenya, there's a story of parents who actually told their kids,
it's okay,
go in. So, and at the same time, we have many folks who tell their kids, wacha mchezo. You know,
as we call it, sports is mchezo.
Sports is mchezo. They say wacha mchezo, right? So that narrative needs to change, and how we do it is another discussion altogether. But that narrative needs to change. Second is, and this is infrastructure. I'm not talking about tangible stuff. I'm not saying about stadia and all that. I'm talking about, for example, county athletic directors. Do we have that? I don't think so.
Actually, sport is devolved.
It is devolved, but my point is...
So which means that we are supposed to have 40 sports officers.
We do.
47 sports
47,
officers
yes.
across the country.
I like what he's saying. Just finish, and then I'm going to add on to
Yeah,
that.
but the question is, what we are saying is that we want people driving the technical part of the game into these players from a very junior age, because that is what affects Kenyans and Africans generally. It's that when we come up against the Europeans and the Americans from a technical standpoint, we just don't have it.
Because that's in point 2C of the Azimio one, because I want to move on to the Kenya Kwanza one. So, Cynthia,
Yeah.
improving coaching standards, what's it that government can do to facilitate this?
Allow me to talk about what he just said, because it's going to segue into the question you're asking. In Spain, every municipality has a FIFA A standard coach or FIFA C standard coach, and they are connected to the municipalities. So whatever FKF is doing with training coaches, there's a way that it works with government. So it's not just FKF training coaches and then these coaches go to their clubs and all of that. There's still another angle, another level where they are attached to counties. That I think is what should happen. So he's saying specific. Now we have devolved sports, but county directors are in charge of everything, or they're in charge of making sure that the primary school things are going on, the high school things are going on, and they're involved in this and that. But then we do not have coaches who are specific. We do not have FIBA A level A coaches who are government. Who are under government, forget being under KBF, can then, the government work with KBF or with FKF and whatnot, and make sure that these guys are now positioned in these counties.
That's in a manifesto where we've got in the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, they expand the National Youth Talent Academy to include all sports and simultaneously devolve it to county level and introduce the County Sports Talent Academy. Now, is it workable?
It's workable, but it boils down to what Cynthia said. Do we have the will to do it?
Are we saying that the main thing here is not actually an administrative problem, but a culture problem? Culture
is huge, but also capacity and capability. Do we have the right people? You can't change what people don't know. You cannot influence. I can't come and influence if I don't know what to do. So you have to have the right people on the ground to be able to deliver this also.
All right. So I'm going to give you a minute each and to speak about something, and it's about money. And I want you to talk about tax. There is a provision actually in the Sports Act that an athlete can actually ask for tax waivers. And number two, if you sponsor teams, then you can get tax waivers. In a minute, Ngaro.
Actually, it's not even the Sports Act. It's a provision. It's under the tax laws. Let me start with the one on the athletes. This is across board. It's for every employee. You can be taxed. If I'm working in the UK, I can be taxed in the UK and also taxed here. So if I'm taxed, for example, as an athlete, I win a marathon there and I'm taxed in the UK, what normally happens is then I should be given a tax credit, which I come and file, not even claim, come file with KRA. So I'm not going to be hit on both ends. If there's a deficit, of course, then there's a way to set it off on the iTax system. So that's with regard to the with the earnings. On the issue of sponsorships, Section 15(1)(z), I think, of the Income Tax Act is anyone who puts in money into sponsorship of sports, then of course it's an allowable deduction.
The only challenge is that it's not clear.
It's not clear, one, and two, I don't think there's goodwill from government, because also, I'll be honest, corporates haven't done their research, because this is a law that has been there for 6 years. So there's a lot of civic education that needs to happen also.
Cynthia, this sports fund, we know it now known as the Sports, Arts and Social Development Fund. Only about 30% goes to sports. But everyone's asking for a share of it. Should it go to the national teams and events as is, or should it be more directed to development?
Both. I think if you ask me, the government is in charge of national teams. And so, we shouldn't be having the embarrassment that we had the other day. And I know that there's a lot that has gone into the teams. We have to give government credit for that for the last couple of years. Up until, I think, the last 2-3, about the last month actually is when we had a bit of an issue. But government has really improved in terms of just being able to support the national teams. Development is a big issue. So, and development is coaching. You have the Kenya Academy of Sports. We need to put money in that. We have, training of trainers and all of that. So I think it's up to government, yes, to say that within the framework that is available or improving the framework that is available, how then do they invest in capacity and capability? The UK has done a really good job. I know we're out of time, but I think we can go on and on this.
Well, actually, you've had it. I think the biggest problem with us when it comes to sport is a culture problem. And it is very difficult to, in simple terms, legislate against bad manners. Because when there's good corporate governance, everyone wants to break it. But, so all the people who are there, whatever they are talking about, ideas that should have been put forward to these political parties. Sport is serious business. It has to be moved to that. Michezo sio mchezo, so to speak in Swahili. Thank you very much for being with us on this edition where we're talking about manifestos and sport.